What does the 2024 Denver housing market hold for us? Hey everyone, it's Alyson Wahl with Live South Denver, your real estate strategist and realtor for the South Denver area. Phew, after the ups and downs and the hots and colds of the past couple of years, there is a lot of conjecture about what 2024 holds for the market. Let's talk about the market factors noted in the media, and I will happily share my perspectives and opinions as well. First, the economy. Will the feds raise or lower rates? The feds have come out and said they plan to lower rates in 2024 if things stay on the same trajectory that we've been on. That's great news. What isn't known is when they'll really start moving things in the downward direction, by how much, and actually how mortgage rates in that market will respond. Recall, there were times in 2023 when the feds would move their federal funds rate and nothing would happen to the mortgage rate. And that's because the mortgage market had already built in what the feds were going to do. They had planned ahead, they had kind of built in the feds' activity and what they knew the feds were going to do, and so nothing actually happened to mortgage rates. So while we hope that rates go down if the feds lower their rate, what if it's already been baked into what's happening in the market and nothing happens? Many of you know this, and this graph supports it, but mortgage rates are not solely tied to what the feds say and do. So there will be fluctuations in rates separate from the feds' activity. This graph is the bonds market, and it shows how that tracks much closer to mortgage rates and why sometimes when the feds make a statement, a decision, a movement in the market, it doesn't correlate to exactly what's happening with rates because the bonds market already did something. They built things in, they built a movement in the bonds market in, and that is what made rates go up or down ahead of or after what the feds said. All that to say, the reason we talk about the Fed so much is they just have a lot of sway on consumer confidence and, as we can tell over this last year plus, on what happens with rates. All right, will there be a recession? That's one of the other hot questions. There's been a lot of talk about that since 2022. Thought we would have one in 2023. People are pushing it out, saying it'll happen in 2024. But we just had record spending for Black Friday, $9.8 billion. Record spending. That's in the face of student debt relief being taken away, in the face of increasing credit card debt. The jobs market isn't softening like the feds expected. So the majority of financial houses think that we are going to be avoiding a recession, but see softening in consumer spending in early 2024 because of all the spending that happened in 2023 and the fact that there is no more push of dollars into the economy from the government, no more incentives and tax rebates and all the extras that were going on during COVID and the pandemic. So kind of that extra savings is gone. Goldman Sachs and many others take the stand that the U.S. is going to see growth just shy of 2% in 2024 and avoid a recession. Couple that with the Fed's goals of seeing about 2% inflation and getting us to about 4% unemployment through the course of 2024, we can really wrap up 2024 or sum it up with the numbers 2024. 2% growth, 0 recessions, 2% inflation, and 4% unemployment. Now, we all know there are plenty of global factors that could still shake things up. This is an election year, so that certainly is going to play a part. For the real estate side of things, there has been a large-scale study that has looked retrospectively at the election periods and seen that real estate does tend to slow down in about the 6-week window leading up to an election. So we should expect the possibility of a slower real estate market nationwide. However, once the election is complete, things return to normal for their seasonal time, regardless of the outcome of the election. So it does not matter whether people are thrilled with the outcome, not thrilled with the outcome, because we are a divided country at this point, folks. Things will return to their seasonal norm once the election is complete. But sellers, this is important for you because if you are fairly apolitical, you don't really take notice, as hard as that may be with ad campaigns, but you don't think about it much, you might want to avoid being on the market and listing in that fall period of, say, Labor Day through November, which sometimes is a good season to list in for us. We tend to get a little bit of a boost here in Colorado then, but this year we may find it to be slower. Statistically, the data shows that it can be. On top of that, we of course have international politics, which is keeping everyone on their toes as well. How are things looking for the Colorado economy? Well, the Leeds School of Business puts out a forecast every year, and they say the Colorado economy does have growth ahead of it. They expect us to grow about 1.4% in 2024. For jobs, that means an increase of about 42,000 jobs for the coming year. Now, if we also look at the most recent jobs report, we have 90,000 job openings in Colorado. So that means we have about 2 job openings for every 1 person. It's going to make it very hard for our employers to fill all of those openings from right here within the state with local seekers. Colorado has among the lowest rate of unemployment in the nation, and you take all of this, our unemployment numbers, our job growth, the ratio of open jobs to people, and we really need to be pulling in people from outside, which is good because we need to boost our net migration numbers. Colorado has really decreased in terms of pulling people into the state, and some of that has to do with affordability because of what we've seen happen to home prices since the pandemic. We were such a popular place to move to. If you've been a longtime watcher of the channel, you heard so many stories as I shared about people saying, I have been longing to get to Colorado. I could not do it because I needed to work remote, keep my job, have the pay, not change up too much of their life. And then the pandemic opened up those opportunities for people all across the country. And that really opened up the floodgates here. And then our prices changed. And so our affordability moved, and now we're seeing a decrease, not a lowering. People aren't running out, and Colorado has a loss of population, but we're seeing less people move in, and it is an affordability reason. And with growth in 7 out of 11 of our key industries also forecast by Leeds Business School, the ones that aren't growing, we're talking finance, real estate, construction. Construction is going to be decreasing and losing jobs. It's actually the biggest sector forecast to lose jobs because decrease in permitting. So we are on the downward trend for permitting from builders. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But there is a lot of confidence in the Colorado economy as a whole, which is great news. And I see that confidence carrying over into the real estate market as a whole. I have not seen this market be sluggish since rates started dropping from their high in October. A lot of activity, very strong buyer activity, curiosity moving through the fall and into the spring. People who thought they would buy in the spring, moving that up and even buying at the end of 2023. Just a lot of strength and confidence in the market and where it's headed. That confidence doesn't stop with the buyers. There are sellers who have listing contracts ready and waiting for the spring market to hit because they really want to capitalize on the boost that happens here in the spring once we come out of winter as well. Now, aside from my anecdotal data, we also have this. Here is the data from a survey of hundreds and hundreds of CEOs across the country. They have increased their optimism in the economy 8 points since summer of 2022. I don't know if an increase of 8 points seems like a lot to you. However, where that score is now puts us on par with where they saw us in spring of 2016, summer of 2020, as we were coming out of the pandemic and everything was opening back up. And we had tanked. We were very low in spring of 2020. So we are really on the rise and coming into a space where there is a lot of optimism about the economy. These same CFOs are expecting just shy of 2% growth, which puts them in agreement with hundreds of financial houses across the country. Then we have Bank of America's Home Buyer Insight Report. This came out in December and reflects data going back to October, and previous to that, October again is when we had our highest interest rates of the year. At that point, they still were seeing a 23% decrease in buyers who were willing to wait for rates to drop to make a home buying decision. So this data is captured all the way up to the point where we have our highest interest rates of the year, and buyers said, I am tired of waiting. These rates are not going to determine my next steps. They're not going to determine when I buy a house. And that is massive in terms of our next steps, our trajectory, where things are going in the home buying market. A 23% decrease shows a strength and confidence and where we see the market going in 2024, particularly when we have the Feds saying they intend to decrease rates through 2024. Even if it's mild, that is going to convey a steady market and a market to have confidence in. So while we may have fewer buyers saying they care, it doesn't mean we don't have any buyers caring, and rates are still really important because they are one of the easiest levers we have to move affordability, right? If rates come down, affordability improves by a massive amount. We love low rates when it comes to our house payment and what it does for our budget. So let's talk rates. Roughly 2/3 of outstanding mortgages in the country have a rate below 4%, and about 90% of all mortgages are below 6%. I think that bears repeating to really let it sink in. Roughly 2/3 are below 4%, and about 90% are below 6%. And that does not even take into account the approximate 40% of homeowners who don't even have a mortgage. I bring that up because I cannot separate rates from inventory and rates from home selling activity. We'll get to rate projections in the end, but we're just going to talk about what all of this means to the market. When rates are lower, home activity, home sales are higher, right? It makes it easier for people to move. It makes home buying easier on the budget. So sellers are quicker to sell because it's easier for them to go and get something else. Sellers are usually buyers. Counter that, when rates are higher, our home selling activity is lower, just like we saw this year. Nationwide, it was one of our lowest years of overall home selling activity. The same was true here in Denver. Now, when we use the word inventory as a statistic has a specific meaning. It's reflecting how many homes are available for the current pace of consumption. So when rates are higher, consumption is lower. This gap means we have more months of inventory available. When rates are lower, consumption is higher. This gap is not a lot of available inventory. It means we're really tight. That's when we get into those 2 weeks of inventory if we're lucky. That's what we saw during the pandemic, and that is what fueled the bidding wars. One of the things the data has shown us over the last several months is that we see consumers are now more sensitive to rate change than actually being sensitive to the rate that they find on a specific day. I was talking with clients a couple weeks ago. They are going to be selling a home in the short future, and they have a rate locked in at 2.75. Now, if they locked it in a few hours earlier that same day, it would have been 2.25. They bemoaned the 0.5%, but they knew that in the grand scheme, it didn't matter much because of how low the rate already was. But when we get into rates where we are now in the 6s, that 0.5 point feels so much more important to buyers. So when we see rates move from 7 to 6.5, or even from 8 to 7.5, we see loads more traction in the market. Okay, let's pick up the inventory conversation, but from a little bit different angle. We have been in a period of low inventory in Denver for years, a very long time. In fact, since starting January 2013 to date, that means 10 years, there have only been 7 months out of that period of time where we have had inventory over 3 months of inventory. As I mentioned, during COVID, we had a lot of activity, we had a lot of sales, we had a lot of buyers, it was a low rate time. We had inventory down in the 2-week window. It was just a very vibrant time in the market. Now, here we are with this higher rate time, but not a lot of inventory. We're still at less than 2.5 months of inventory in the market. And because of this tight inventory, we see prices holding very well. It's not to say we haven't had price fluctuations. We, in fact, saw a lot of volatility in our market this year. From January to June, July, we saw a 10% change in market value in the upward direction. We had a very strong spring this year. Then rates really took off, and it took away all of that added value in most of the market because we're back to about 0% year-over-year change at the end of 2023. But that doesn't mean that throughout 2023, we were flat all year. We were not. The challenge is that when buyers are out in force, we don't have enough inventory to keep up. But if builders were able to help support in this place, in this vacuum, we would do a lot better managing prices. I know I can confidently say, I don't know if this is true across the board, but with the people that I work with, I can confidently say most buyers would prefer a new construction home, all other things being equal. Commute time being equal, yard size being equal. And the one thing that is usually a hang up, the no mature trees, right? You have to wait so long for them to come in when you're in a new construction community. But if everything else were equal, almost every single time a new construction home would win out. But Colorado and the nation are in a new construction housing shortage. Actually, we're in a housing shortage overall, and we have to rely on the builders to fill the gap, and they aren't able to. Colorado has been battling a housing shortage since the 90s. That's when we really took off. We became popular. People wanted to move here. I came in the 90s. I actually always wanted to live here. I came from Florida and never loved the heat, humidity, bugs, the whole thing. I'd go to the beach, but always longed for the mountains. So I fit right along in with these numbers and the crowds. But look how this graph depicts how far deep we are into this shortage. To get out of this, conservative estimates say that we need at least 50,000 new permits for construction every year from 2022 to 2025. Now, the challenge is 2022 was our peak year for permitting because we had so much growth through the pandemic, and then as rates started to peak, builders forecast ahead, saw the shift, and started to pull back. Well, we are now in a decline of permitting. Remember, I talked about the economy and which sides of the economy were going to contract here in Colorado, and construction was one of them. It's actually our biggest one that's going to contract, and it's because there's not going to be as many jobs for construction because we have pulled back on permits. So even in 2022, we did not have 50,000 new construction permits. So we certainly aren't going to hit that in 24 and 25, and we did not hit it in 2023. And again, that is a conservative estimate. I have seen double that needed to catch us up. So if we are behind on housing, if we are behind on what we need, as is the rest of the country, it's a hard argument to say that we're going to see prices decline on the long haul. Now, they blip and they move, but when the rates get to a palatable position and we have generations that want to buy a home, that find home ownership a key to stability, to a financial piece of their portfolio, I just don't see how we're going to see prices decline. We're talking about prices in just a minute, but the forecasts have been that we're not going to see a lot of price growth nationwide, and I don't think that's going to be the case. We're seeing builders retool their businesses in this post-pandemic shift, which has been really interesting to me. Richmond is one of the bigger ones and has made some really large changes. If you've seen some of the builder videos, you've heard how I've talked through what they're doing with their business. Changing how they do the design component of their business. They are moving their salespeople around and kind of shrinking the sales force, having them cover large areas. That's not that uncommon now with some of the builders, but it's typically lower level builders. So I'm seeing Richmond shift from being a higher tier builder to a mid-tier builder, but they're also becoming much more fluid with how they move their inventory, for when they release it for sale, how they handle getting their inventory into the hands of sellers. They may have inventory labeled for sale, meaning they know what's going on what lot. It may have gone to permits, so they are ready to dig it, but they're going to hold it, not release it for sale, not make it available until they feel like they've got everything else they want sold at the price at which they want it sold. So they're managing their inventory drastically differently than they used to. And for them, it probably helps their bottom line. They're trying to find a way to, in their mind, help the consumer and shorten the time frame to closing so that they feel like they have a better control over interest rates, so that the consumer isn't constrained with a surprise on where they're locking in their rate. Taylor Morrison has changed their process. They're trying to get the client closer to a final price by contract. Lennar has been less aggressive on land development and getting houses out of the ground. They were really charging ahead and just full of inventory everywhere. I have seen them pull back. And boy, oh boy, builders who I knew who were just bragging about owning so much dirt and getting ready to pop so many houses out of the ground, I've not seen hide nor hair from them. So certainly some big changes with those guys as well. The good news is not every builder is making changes to their business model in ways that exemplify that they're feeling stress. Shea has not done much to change how they do business at all. And Toll Brothers, I've just learned this, is popping out about 200 spec homes across the Denver metro area for 2024. Now, with Toll and spec, that's not really what people love to hear, right? You go to Toll wanting to create your own product. They have so many choices and selections, but Shea and Toll are probably the top two builders we have in the Denver metro area. So those two compete for higher end buyers and clients. Toll has a much wider footprint, so they can capture more, a quantity that is higher than Shea can. And if they're willing to do spec and they design really lovely product from their own design team, then they are positioning themselves as rates drop, and they can shorten that time from putting the spec in the MLS or making it available for sale to close, right? If we can get a 3 or 6 month window, then they are seeing that they're making it possible and viable as rates drop to capture an active, ready, willing, and able buyer. So they are looking at this coming year as opportunity. Unlike builders who have repositioned or changed their business model in a way that has them pulling back to then move forward, Toll has just been full steam ahead. Shea has just been full steam ahead, just no changes. From other builders in general, I'm seeing less land development, fewer lots released. I'm seeing some price increases and some incentive rollbacks even before their fiscal year end. All of that tells me they don't have excess inventory and they don't have an excess coming ahead. So there is a tightness that goes along with fewer permits. It goes along with being more conservative going into 2024. And that tells me again, the builders aren't ready to play loose in 2024 as much as they did in 2023. So I would expect pricing to be more tight and incentives to be less. All right, let's carry this right over into what my projections and summary are for 2024, and we will start with this, with the inventory. Lacking sufficient new housing inventory from builders not being able to supply what we need and sellers being in this golden handcuff situation until rates come down a bit more, I think we're going to be seeing strong prices across the Denver market. The rate conversations are all over the place. They're at a national level, right? We don't get rates just for Denver. You don't get them just for Austin. But if we average what some of the national players are saying, like Fannie Mae, National Association of Realtors, Redfin, Wells Fargo, the Mortgage Bankers Association, here's what they're projecting for each of the 4 quarters. Q1 at 7.28, Q2 at 6.9, Q3 at 6.62, and Q4 at 6.43. Now, the ranges are much wider than that. There are people who are saying we can get down to the 4s by the end of the year. And there are people saying we'll be up at 7.2 at the end of the year. But I think these averages tell a much better story, and I feel very comfortable with this. And so I'm going to go right along with where these averages are. They are mild. They are something that would not scare the feds. The feds don't want to see us dropping too soon, particularly not in the peak buying season, March, April, May, and June. Now, if we get something better than this, I'm all in. I am all for improving affordability for the buyer, but I think we're going to see some modest changes throughout the year and nothing drastic, at least in the first half for sure. These rates bring some stability to the market if the feds can stick to that, and if the bonds market does not take over and push things down too low and also create a buying frenzy. And so if we're in a fairly stable market where rates aren't brought down too low, I actually think the activity in Denver is going to increase quite a bit. I foresee about a 20% increase in the activity of the market. So we only sold about 38,000 homes in Denver for 2023, which is very low. Our high was 60,000 during the pandemic. We're usually in and around the 50,000, maybe up to 55, but we were at 38. So a 20% increase is only saying we're going to sell around 7,500 more homes, which I think could even be a fairly conservative estimate with the stability that we're forecasting for 2024. With the confidence in our job market, with rates declining and the activity that we see every time we see a significant rate drop, I think it's possible that we'll see some really strong activity this year, and particularly in our spring buying season. Again, think back to what I shared about spring of 2023. We saw a similar thing in 2022. From January to about June, we gained 10% in home values. We only lost that after rates really spiked in the back half of this year. So even if the market isn't that aggressive, it would not be a surprise to see us gain a strong amount of value in the front half of the year with this nice stable market. If rates are decreasing half, 3/4 of a point between now through May, particularly if we see sellers putting some beautiful and nice inventory on the market. The struggle is when we see dogs come on the market and they're homes that buyers don't want. Because of the lack of excess money in the budget, because everything is going to interest, buyers are really looking for homes that are already well maintained and don't cause any extra work, right? They don't want to be doing updates. They don't want to have to come in and paint and do the floors and do some work on the exterior and do landscaping. So if the dogs hit the market, that's where the challenge is. If we see some beautiful homes hit, they are going to go. The big real estate AI houses have put out their projections for the year on pricing. Redfin says Q1 and Q4 are going to be flat nationwide, and that Q2 and Q3 are going to be down 1%. As an example for what that would mean here in Denver, if Q2 of 2023 had an average single family home price of $725, that means in Q2 2024, a single family home would cost $718,000. Again, I don't think that's going to be the case. Zillow has come out saying they think the market's going to decline 0.2%, so a flat market. Realtor.com actually sides a bit more on the soft economy side of things, saying that the overall housing market nationwide will decline 1.7% year over year. And then they break down major metro markets, city by city, and they suggest that Denver will drop 5% year over year. That means that they think a single family home would drop more than $35,000 by the end of 2024. I find that projection overly aggressive given the confidence that we see. Again, back to the stability that we see in the market, where we see Colorado's economy for jobs, and how tight our inventory has been and continues to be with builders pulling back on permits. Again, I think it's possible for us to have a strong spring and then for some of that to get eaten up if rates fluctuate aggressively. It's exactly what happened in 2023 and 2022. But to say that we're going to actually decline off of 2023 in 2024 while we have a steady rate forecast. Now, we don't know what's going to happen, but if we actually stick with what the feds are saying, where they're going to decrease rates, and we're saying that possibly rates are going to be somewhere in the mid 6s to 7s, which is not a wide variety, right? So I'm going to say that's a fairly steady rate state. I just cannot see where buyers are going to hold off or be able to push on sellers with this little inventory and active selling that we have here in Denver and actually get to decrease prices. We have already had a hard enough time getting sellers to give home warranties, to resolve things on inspection at a large scale. If the house is in good condition, the sellers still push back. Even at the end of 2023, pushing into 2024, the market is warm, if not hot. So to say that we would see that change in a drastic manner is really challenging me and my boots on the ground insight. Now, I could be wrong. I've never nailed any of these projections. I understand that, but I just don't think this is accurate. I think we're going to see growth, and my projection for growth for 2024 is on the modest side, between 3 and 5%. For us to go above that would not surprise me at all. But we had really strong years pre-COVID where we had lots of traction, bidding wars, modest inventory, and we only grew 3% year over year, and no one complained about it at all. So to see 3 or 5 would not feel uncomfortable. That's where I stand. Thank you so much for joining me. I would love to hear your thoughts and insights. Leave your notes. And if you want to talk about where things might fit in for you with Denver, selling and buying in 2024, please reach out. I'd love to get strategic with you. And I will, of course, see y'all next week.